Isn't art meant to say something, regardless of what the content of the something is?
It can.
And I'm not by no means suggesting that, art only has merit when it says something, but what I am saying, though, is that realistically, when you account for what an artist effectively does, which I would wager is interpret the struggles of their times, for lack of a better term, because living is a struggle, no matter how you put it, and artists has this compulsion to externalize that in whichever fashion that they see fit. And
Sure. There are artists who certainly emphasize that or work on that more obviously. And
others choose to be more. Yep. So you're more on the subtlety.
I absolutely. I don't like to bump people over the head with something at a
Bump people over the head. That's quite the way to put it. No, because so again, referencing, these passports and stuff like that, it's interesting that, you refer to it as, bucking over the head, but these historical things I was exposed to. Also, another thing I noticed too is that the entire time you were making sure to distinguish, between fashion photography and photojournalism,
Well, I mean, look, there's always going to be crossover, and just for the sake of conversation, you have to draw some distinctions.
that neat little
the fact that there
are something I'm picking up upon.
Yeah, look, and the fact that there are even names for these things, we have to all universally agree that there is a difference and there is a way to talk about that. But I would easily say that fashion is my biggest influence, but it's not my only influence. And certainly documentary and documentation is a huge part of what I do. In fact, one would argue that that's all I do is document other artists and
moments in times, yeah.
Sure. And throughout time. I'm not just out here shooting for a magazine. I'm just photographing one artist or one person for one time and then see you later, forget it. I tend to want to photograph people over time. My daughter, obviously that's an easy one. We've been working together for a very long time. Kyle Abraham, he's a choreographer, really world-known.
I see a lot of dance stuff in the body of your work, actually.
Really, and that's something that, for me, I always wanted to shoot things over time. Did I have access to the same people all the time over time? No. That was something that I always regretted with one of the projects that I did years ago, was that I couldn't keep photographing the same artists throughout their careers. It's something that bothered me quite a bit. So I made sure that every other project I did after that, I was going to, improve on that.
It might not be see, this is something I think is worth establishing, because you said that the nature of your work, you try to keep it lighthearted, for lack of a better term.
I would say not lighthearted. I would say it's not heavy. There's meaning, and there's
you're not looking to bump people, as you said.
Yeah, I don't want to hit people over the head with my idea. It's more sort of there's a communion between myself and the subject, where we have sort of over time.
You want to portray that.
Yeah.
And so I'm that world that you're depicting, I'm not that well versed in it, but speaking of historical photography that I'm familiar with, there's this lady who is most famously known in figure skating for having executed the first ever backflip. I don't know her name, I could look it up real quick, but it's definitely a thing that she did that, and she was a Black woman, and she got a lot of flack for doing what she did.
You mean she did it in a routine, or she
No,
did it
competitively?
Okay.
Competitively, she did that work. So her career, I'm curious to see how, let's say hypothetically, obviously, that you get to maintain a relationship with such a person, you're depicting them, by the very nature of you depicting them, you won't be able to avoid the heaviness of their history because they're known to be a fairly.
Well, I can speak to that a little bit. So look, if the context again is so important here, and this is something that I think a lot of people, misinterpret when they're looking at art or someone's work, whatever.
People as in the lay person, or people.
An audience in general. Yes, sure, a lay person, someone who hasn't done any homework or just comes upon it, right? And that's the person that I generally have in mind when I'm working. I don't do it for any specific audience, but I'm always thinking of like, what would someone who's never seen a photograph or whatever, like I try to keep it some.
If we were to think of like photography as food items, yours are more in the realm of fruits. You like to just picking cherries and bananas.
Well, I have a friend who lives in France, and every time I see her, she calls me the strawberry picker.
How apropos. So very much so. You're not looking to burn the tongue of your audience with the ghost pepper.
No, I'm not. And it's not super intentional, but I just don't, it's not how I think. It's not how I feel. I'm not interested in it.
It's interesting that you do vocally talk about quite a lot of things, whether implicitly or explicitly. You being a woman, for example, you've mentioned that quite a few times, and how that was.
I knew that.
So as far as that nature peering through to your work, how much of a conscious effort do you make to, for lack of a better term, present the strawberry aspect and not so much hint at things? Because, and I could be wrong, obviously, but the history that I do know of performance art in general, I think, theater, for example, it's the most famously, like male-dominated field back in those days, obviously. And women had to really carve a path for themselves to get there.
Yeah, I mean, that's every field. I mean, I don't know any woman who hasn't had to work twice as hard, twice as long, and take the most shit, down.
Better way,
no matter what the field.
Do you come from that era when I forget like what's it called, but like apparently like women were not allowed to like
have a credit card?
Something like that. Yeah, is that your era specifically, or are you like?
I'm not super up on years of the history, but I do know that it was until recently in my lifetime that, my friends' parents, like the women couldn't have their own credit card or their own bank account or things like that. They couldn't really get a job without their husband or their man in their family agreeing to allow certain things to happen. Yeah, it was all put through this, sieve of the male gaze or permission or whatever you want to call it. And that still holds true today. It's just, it's supposedly been lifted. But those attitudes still.
Supposedly implying that it's not the case.
The attitudes still exist, even if the physical barriers don't exist, which is nonsense. I had been in the workforce since I was very young, and the things that were available to me were very few, even, especially because of where I grew up. It was not, it was a very conservative part of the world, the mid-Atlantic, rural Maryland. There were a lot of farming communities, a lot of agriculture. It wasn't very sophisticated in terms of like what people were doing in their daily lives. It was blue collar.
Sounds humble.
With some white collar. Yeah, I mean,
There's nothing wrong with humility.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to get into like the ins and outs of my personal family dynamic necessarily, but there were, I did not have a lot of things available to me. And so also being a girl in that situation, when you're trying to navigate the world, it was very like, eye-opening as I would start to enter into the workforce that, all of the girls are fighting for scraps, and if you got anything, you had to like hang on to it with your fucking claws like this, and you were paid less, you worked longer, you had to wear a short skirt, you had to look cute, or else. And if something went wrong, you were the first one to go. Well,
So you're seeing, and yet you're so guarded. And yet you are so guarded.
I don't think I'm guarded. I'm very open and honest with everything. I mean,
Don't want to bump people over the head using your work. That's being guarded, I would argue.
no, I don't agree with that. I'm doing it. No, I just think that, there's a time and place for everything. And
So you fought the fight and you're like, okay, cool.
dude, I am always exhausted. I'm always tired, but there's so many things that I have to fight for all the time that have nothing to do with art. But, that's just how it is. There are many things that I want to do and achieve in life, and I have to give each one the time and attention that they deserve. Do I get to do that all the time? No. Is that something that I want to do? Yes, it's something I choose to do, and I can do, thank God. I'm super fucking grateful all the time for the life that I have. Am I upset about the way the art world, works now? A little bit, I think things could be done a little bit differently with more transparency, whatever. This whole idea that, Web3 right now can be liberating, I think is a false narrative, and I think it's crap.
Propaganda. Good old-fashioned propaganda.
Yeah, but crypto, it's just a way to trade crypto. I'm not going to delude myself that it's any different than that, but it doesn't mean that I don't want to at least be on the ground floor or part of what could be a good art market for the future. I don't want to be left out of that if that is a possibility. I think if enough people use it, it will be, It's just getting all the fucking people's head out of their ass.
That's going to be quite the thing to witness over time, but let's not bore.
It is over time. That's right. Everyone thinks it's like already over before it's even has changed.
Let's not bore the people with the technicalities of blockchain, because Lord knows there's plenty of boring stuff that has been spoken about ad nauseum. I do want to ask you lastly about art and family, your relationship with that.
Well, obviously I bring my family into my work. Well, so I can have a relationship with both, but
there can be a little bit of difference, because would you be, say, still depicting your daughters in your work if they were not doing dance? Who knows? I'm not in touch with that alternate universal self.
Well, I mean, like, would I be? I did before she became a dancer. I mean, I've been working with her forever, and so the answer is yes. I think, when that's just the way I grapple with being a parent, my own motherhood, because that was not something I had growing up. Like my parents were rarely present in my life. So,
I hear that it's sacred.
It can be, sure. And yeah, and to me, especially, yeah, because once I had my own family, air quotes on that one, because I don't own her, but she was an extension of me and my subconscious. Like, I don't think that, my relationship with my daughter is necessarily reflective of my relationship with anyone else in the world. But to me, it's always felt otherworldly because of the experience I had as a young person and growing up. I always knew that I wanted to be a parent and do it in a way that I would want to have been treated, if that makes sense. Like, I became the parent. I hope that
you're healing your inner child.
Sure. Yeah, it's very cathartic for me in many ways. Do other people care about it? I could give a flying fuck, because I care about it and I get to do it, and that's special enough. Half the reason I don't put a lot of these images out in the world is because I think it is very personal and it's going to take a lot for people to understand it. That's fine. But, you know, the idea of putting it on the blockchain was exciting to me in the beginning because then it would just supposedly be somewhere forever and nobody could touch it. And there was proof